I want you to picture a sound so heavy, so crushing, that it literally feels like the weight of a collapsing building.
Oh, man. Yeah.
It's the late 80s. You're in Birmingham, England. And this noise, it isn't coming from a massive 5-piece metal band with double kick drums and walls of Marshall stacks.
Right, which is what you'd expect.
Exactly.
Yeah.
It's coming from 2 skinny guys and a cheap plastic gray box.
It sounds like a riddle, doesn't it? But you are describing the birth of Godflesh. And honestly, it's one of the most significant paradoxes in heavy music history.
It really is, because on paper, this just shouldn't have worked. You have Justin Broderick on guitar and B.C. Green on bass. And today, they are widely considered the godfathers of industrial metal.
Mm-hmm.
If you listen to Nine Inch Nails, or Fear Factory, or even modern Metallica, you are hearing Godflesh's DNA. But here is the thing that threw me for a loop when I was digging into our sources for this deep dive.
Oh, the genre label.
Yeah, they hate the term industrial metal, don't they?
They despise it. And that's really the first thing we have to untangle today. If you ask Broderick, he'll tell you Godflesh is a rock band. Or even a pop band, in a very twisted sense.
A very twisted sense.
Very. He claims they were far more influenced by The Cure, Killing Joke, and early hip-hop than they ever were by the metal scene of the time.
Which sounds insane when you actually listen to their first record. I mean, it sounds like a foundry exploding.
It does.
But I guess that's the mission for our deep dive today. We've got a ton of great sources, a detailed history of the band, their entire discography from 1988 all the way to the present, and some really revealing interviews about their philosophy.
Yeah, the interviews are fascinating.
Right. And we need to figure out how 2 guys trying to sound like The Cure ended up accidentally inventing the heaviest genre on Earth with this unique machine plus human formula.
And, maybe more importantly, why they eventually had to destroy the band to save it. Because the story of Godflesh isn't just about music.
No, it's not.
It's about mental health, financial ruin, and the really strange relationship between man and machine.
So let's go right to the scene of the crime. Birmingham, late 1980s. Now, I've visited Birmingham recently, and it's a lovely modern city today.
Sure.
But the sources paint a very different picture of the environment Broderick and Green grew up in.
Oh, it was a totally different world back then. You have to understand, this was the tail end of the Thatcher era in the UK.
Right.
East Birmingham was this bleak landscape of brutalist concrete architecture, high unemployment, just, gray skies everywhere.
The classic industrial grimness.
Exactly. Broderick and Green grew up in council estates, which are basically public housing projects that were essentially just giant concrete blocks.
I actually saw a quote in the interviews where Broderick described growing up there as suffocating.
That is the perfect word for it. It wasn't just depressing, it was genuinely oppressive. You were surrounded by these massive, unfeeling structures.
Yep.
And that environment is so crucial to understand, because Godflesh didn't write songs about Birmingham. Their music literally sounded like Birmingham.
Like the sonic equivalent of concrete.
Exactly that.
Now, they actually started playing together way back in 1982, right? But under a different name, Fall of Because.
Right, they were just kids then. And the name Fall of Because comes from a Killing Joke song, which also references an Aleister Crowley chapter.
Okay, so that gives you a hint at their early interests.
Yeah, post-punk and the occult. But they couldn't quite get the sound right until they reformed as Godflesh in 1988.
And even the name Godflesh itself, I mean, it sounds like a typical death metal band name at first glance.
It does, yeah.
But the meaning behind it from the sources is actually kind of philosophical.
It is really deep. Broderick explained that God represents something immense, inconceivable, completely abstract.
Right.
And flesh represents the human, the physical, the vulnerable. So the music is fundamentally about that collision, the massive weight of the universe just crushing the fragile human body.
Wow. Which perfectly brings us to the quote-unquote third member of the band, the thing providing all that massive weight.
The machine.
The Alesis HR-16 drum machine. Now, I looked up a picture of this thing while prepping for this deep dive.
Yeah.
It looks like a giant gray calculator or like a weird cash register. It does not look metal at all.
It's totally not. The Alesis HR-16 was actually designed for pop and hip-hop producers.
Really?
Yeah. It has these very clean, snappy, pristine sounds. If you play it right out of the box, it sounds like a cheap 80s dance track.
So how on earth did they get it to sound like a monster? Because on the albums, those drums sound like literal cannon fire.
Well, this is where the real innovation happens. They didn't treat the drum machine like a percussion instrument.
Okay.
They treated it like an electric guitar. They ran the drum machine through heavy distortion pedals and giant bass amplifiers.
Wow.
And then they just cranked the volume until the speakers were physically tearing.
Ah, so they were essentially abusing the equipment.
Completely abusing it. They forced this polite little pop machine to scream. And because it was a machine, it didn't get tired, it didn't lose the beat, it just hammered and hammered with this terrifying, inhuman consistency.
And from the research, that is a key point. Usually, bands use drum machines because they want to sound robotic or futuristic like Kraftwerk or something.
Right.
But Godflesh used it purely out of necessity, didn't they?
This wasn't a stylistic choice at first. Broderick had actually played drums for Napalm Death, the legendary grindcore band. Yeah. So he knew how to play fast and aggressive.
He was a real drummer.
Yeah. But when he picked up the guitar to form Godflesh, the rhythms he heard in his head were just too weird for a human to play properly.
How so?
They were painfully slow, extremely repetitive, and just grinding. A human drummer would naturally get bored, or they would instinctively try to add a groove or a swing to it.
Oh, to make it more musical.
Right. But Broderick didn't want groove. He wanted punishment.
Man, that limitation really became their defining signature. So in 1988, they dropped their self-titled EP, and then in 1989, we get the landmark debut album, Street Cleaner.
Such a great title. It suggests wiping humanity right off the pavement.
It's terrifying.
Yeah.
But looking at the production notes for Street Cleaner, it's also bizarrely mixed for the time. The bass is way louder than the guitar.
Yeah, that is the definitive Godflesh sound. A.C. Green's bass is actually the lead instrument. It's incredibly guttural, down-tuned, and just dripping with distortion.
And what is the guitar doing then?
Broderick's guitar isn't really playing riffs in the traditional metal sense. He's creating texture, high-pitched screeching, waves of feedback, sheer noise. It just floats on top of the bass like a warning siren over a factory.
And the vocals. Because I struggle to even hear lyrics.
They're buried on purpose. Broderick isn't singing to the audience. He sounds like he's trapped inside the mix itself, screaming to get out.
It's incredibly claustrophobic. And I know they were heavily influenced by film, too, which plays into that atmosphere. The cover art for Street Cleaner is actually a still from the movie Altered States.
The Ken Russell film, yes. They loved that art house horror vibe. And Altered States is about a guy regressing to a primal, primitive state inside an isolation tank.
That is so fitting.
It really is. That's exactly what listening to Godflesh feels like. It is isolation tank music.
So Street Cleaner makes huge waves in the underground. They enter the 90s as this massive cult phenomenon. And then they released the album Pure in 1992.
Right.
Now, usually a heavy band gets faster or maybe more aggressive on their follow-up. How did Godflesh evolve with Pure?
They got colder. If Street Cleaner was dirty, urban, grime-like mud and rust pure was stainless steel.
Ooh, I like that comparison.
It was cleaner, way more mechanical, and much more repetitive. This is where they really laid the foundation for what we now call post-metal.
There's a track on there, Pure 2, that is literally just a loop for 20 minutes.
It is a total test of endurance. It hits like a distant cannon over and over again. Broderick loops this hip-hop breakbeat, but slows it down until it sounds like a death march.
It's almost hypnotic when you listen to it.
It's very hypnotic. You stop hearing it as music and start feeling it as a physical pulse in your chest.
But here is where the story gets really messy. The early 90s were a weird time in the music industry. Nirvana had just exploded. Nine Inch Nails was getting huge.
The alternative boom.
Right. Suddenly, major labels are running around frantically looking for the next big thing in angry alternative music. And they look at Godflesh 2 guys with a machine, and they think, dollar signs.
Which was a massive miscalculation on everyone's part. Godflesh actually signed to Columbia Records for their 1994 album, Selfless.
A major label.
Yeah. The label genuinely thought they had the next Nine Inch Nails on their hands, but they didn't understand the music. Trent Reznor writes pop hooks wrapped in noise. Godflesh just writes noise wrapped in noise.
I can only imagine the Columbia executives sitting in a boardroom, utterly confused when they got those master tapes.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. They were probably asking, where is the chorus? Why is this song 8 minutes long?
Yeah.
It was a commercial disaster. It sold maybe 180,000 copies, which, you know, is amazing for an indie punk band, but it's a total failure for a major label expecting platinum.
But the commercial failure isn't even the worst part of the 90s era for them. This is where Broderick says they made what he calls the mistake.
Yes, the identity crisis.
They started hiring human drummers.
This is so fascinating because in almost any other context, Getting a world-class human drummer is a massive upgrade for a band.
Right, you'd think so.
They hired Brian Mantilla, who played with Primus and Guns N' Roses, and later they got Ted Parsons from Prong. I mean, these are incredible top-tier musicians.
So why did Broderick look back and say it was a mistake?
Because it humanized them too much. When you have a real drummer, they naturally add swing and feel to the music. They play slightly ahead of the beat or slightly behind it.
To give it a groove.
Exactly. It gives the music a groove. But Godflesh was never supposed to groove. It was always supposed to be a rigid machine.
It lost that uncanny valley effect that made them so scary.
Spot on. With a human drummer, they just sounded like a really good traditional heavy metal band. They lost that terrifying alien stiffness that set them apart from everyone else.
Ah, I see.
Broderick later said the music became self-conscious. They're trying to be a rock band rather than this bizarre art project from the Birmingham Council Estates.
And that artistic identity crisis rapidly spirals into a severe personal crisis.
Yeah.
We get to 2002, they've released the album Hymns, which features a human drummer, and suddenly everything just collapses.
It happens so fast. First, B.C. Green quits the band.
Wow.
This is the guy who has been by Broderick's side since they were literally kids, and he calls him up just 2 weeks before a major U.S. tour and says, "I'm done."
2 weeks. That's not a resignation, that's pulling the pin on a grenade.
He was just burnt out. He was tired of the music industry nonsense, the bad contracts, the endless grinding of touring. He just wanted to go back to university and live a normal life.
So Broderick is completely alone, but from the sources, he decides to push forward anyway.
He tries to. He calls up Paul Raven from Killing Joke to step in and play bass. They have this huge U.S. tour booked with High on Fire and ISIS. The hype for this tour is very real.
The hype is real, but Broderick's mental state is completely crumbling behind the scenes.
Yeah.
And this leads to what he notoriously calls his Brian Wilson moment.
Yeah.
The part of the story is physically painful to read about. It's the day before the tour is supposed to start. He's supposed to go to the airport.
He wakes up and he is paralyzed. Just a complete, total nervous breakdown.
Oh, man.
He physically cannot get out of bed to face the tour. The tour driver pulls up to his house in Birmingham to take him to the airport. And Broderick, he runs.
He hid from the driver.
He literally hid at a friend's house. He let the phone ring. He let the driver knock on the door. He just curled up in a ball. He couldn't do it.
And you can't just ghost an entire international tour in the music industry without massive consequences.
Oh, absolutely not. The financial fallout was immediate and catastrophic. He had to refund the promoters out of pocket, pay for the useless flights, pay the crew who were depending on him. He actually had to remortgage his house just to cover the debts.
That is brutal.
He ended up $35,000 in debt overnight with no band, no label, and no income.
So Godflesh didn't just break up. It imploded. It was a crater.
Yeah.
And Broderick spends the next few years doing a new project called Jesu, which is this really beautiful, sad, melodic shoegaze music. It feels very much like therapy music.
It absolutely was therapy. It was him processing the trauma of the breakdown.
Yeah.
And for a long time, everyone, including Broderick himself, thought Godflesh was dead and buried forever.
But time heals all wounds. And apparently, crippling credit card debt helps motivate you too. Fast forward to 2009.
Right.
Promoters are starting to offer insane amounts of money for a Godflesh reunion. So Broderick calls Green, and Green actually says yes.
He does.
But, and this is the crucial part of the whole narrative, they have a strict condition for coming back.
The condition was very simple. The machine comes back.
No more human drummers.
No humans allowed behind the kit. If they were going to do this reunion, they had to go back to the original source. Just the two of them, and a laptop functioning as the drum machine.
Wow.
They finally realized that the mistake of the 90s was trying to fix something that was never broken. The stiffness, the mechanical rigidity, that was the magic all along.
And you know, usually reunion albums are terrible. Let's just be honest.
So they're usually just cash grabs.
Exactly. But they eventually release A World Lit Only by Fire in 2014, and it is ferocious. I mean, it charted in the U.S., which was a first for them.
It might honestly be heavier than their early stuff. Broderick switched to playing an 8-string guitar for that record.
Played 8 strings.
Yeah, tuning it down so unbelievably low that the strings were practically flapping off the fretboard. It was minimal, brutal, and primal.
A total return to form.
Exactly. It was the sound of two middle-aged men letting out 20 years of pent-up frustration. The critics absolutely loved it.
And they didn't stop there. This is what I missed initially before doing the research. They kept evolving. They didn't just become a nostalgia act playing the old hits on the festival circuit.
No, not at all. Look at their 2017 album, Post-Self. They pivoted again. Instead of just relying on heavy riffs, they brought back the mood and noise aspects of their sound.
Kind of leaning back into their post-punk roots.
Yeah, it's a very atmospheric, texture-heavy album, almost like their experimental work in the 90s, but somehow even darker.
And then, as recently as 2023, they dropped the album Purge.
Purge is fascinating because it's almost a spiritual successor to the 1992 album Pure. They brought back those hip-hop breakbeats we talked about earlier.
Right.
It has this bouncy rhythmic quality to it, but it's still completely crushed under that signature heavy distortion. It shows that they are still actively exploring that weird intersection of hip-hop and extreme metal, even well into their 50s.
I want to make sure we touch on the themes before we wrap up, because we talked a lot about how angry the music sounds. But Broderick has a really interesting take on the concept of aggression in their music.
He does.
He explicitly compares Godflesh to what he calls macho metal.
This is a critical distinction to make. A lot of traditional metal, if you think of bands like Manowar or Pantera, is fundamentally about projecting power.
Right. It's very, I am strong, I am the conqueror.
Exactly. It's a celebration of male ego and dominance. Godflesh is the complete and total opposite of that.
How so?
Broderick says their music is about the feeling of being crushed and pulverized by the world. It's defensive aggression.
Defensive aggression.
Yeah, it's the sound of a vulnerable person putting up a massive, noisy shield because they feel like the world is constantly attacking them.
That makes so much sense. If you grow up in those suffocating Birmingham council estates, you don't feel like a conqueror. You feel incredibly small.
Precisely. And honestly, that explains their constant use of religious imagery, too.
All right, you see crosses, burning churches on the art, track titles like Christ Bait or hymns.
Yeah, but they aren't a Christian band at all. Broderick uses that imagery specifically because he finds it terrifying.
It's the literal fear of God.
He describes organized religion as intimidating and suffocating. Think about the architecture of a massive Gothic cathedral. It's designed to make you feel tiny and insignificant.
That's a great point.
That is the exact same feeling he wants the music to evoke in the listener. It's not about religious worship, it's about awe, and it's about terror.
So when we look at their legacy overall, I mean, you can't throw a rock at a modern metal festival without hitting a band that owes Godflesh money.
It's the classic Velvet Underground effect. Godflesh didn't sell millions of records themselves, but it seems like everyone who bought one went out and started a band.
Totally. Kirk Hammett from Metallica openly lists them as a favorite. Fear Factory basically took the Godflesh formula, the machine drums mixed with heavy staccato guitars, and just made it slightly more pop-friendly.
You hear their influence in Korn, in Faith. No More Mike Patton actually invited Broderick to join Faith No More at one point.
I didn't know that.
Yeah, there's a great quote from the website Metal Sucks that sums it up perfectly. They wrote, "Everyone from Nine Inch Nails to Fear Factory probably owes these dudes a couple of checks."
But Godflesh never really got the stadium checks, did they?
No, they didn't. And Broderick says he's perfectly fine with that. He said they were always destined to be a musician's band.
Too uncompromising.
Way too uncompromising. If they had sold out to get those stadium checks, they would have had to ditch the drum machine way sooner or start writing traditional choruses, and they just refused to play that game.
It's a hell of a journey for you to take in. Two kids in a concrete jungle who couldn't find a drummer weird enough for their vision, so they just used a plastic box meant for pop music.
Yep.
They accidentally invent a massive genre. They try to become rock stars with human drummers. They lose absolutely everything, and then they finally find their redemption by going right back to the box.
It really proves that sometimes limitations are better than absolute freedom. When they could do anything, when they could hire pro-session drummers and use million-dollar studios, they lost their way.
They lost their identity.
But when they restricted themselves back to just the machine, they found their soul again.
Which leaves you with a really fascinating thought to chew on.
Yeah.
We are living in the age of AI music right now. We have digital tools today that are quote-unquote perfect. They are quantized, they're pitch-corrected, they are flawless in every technical sense.
Oh, absolutely. Everything is perfectly on the grid.
But Godflesh used a primitive, clunky machine to make music that felt incredibly raw, emotional, and human.
It raises a really wild question. Does the flaw actually make it human?
Exactly. Does a primitive machine struggling to sound like a monster actually sound more fundamentally human than a perfect AI trying to sound like a person?
Man, maybe the struggle itself is the point.
Maybe it is. That is definitely something for you to explore on your own. Thanks for diving deep into the brutal world of Godflesh with us.
It was a heavy one.
Sure was. Go listen to Street Cleaner, but maybe keep the lights on while you do. We'll see you next time.